In 2 Timothy 4, 6 through 7, Paul writes, he says, I am being poured out like a drink offering, and the time has come for my departure. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, awards to us on that day. And not only to me, but also those who have longed for his appearing. It's really interesting as you consider that word departure that used there. It's time for his departure. That word actually in the original language had a number of different meanings. But the one meaning that was used in many different scenarios was a term that sailors used, for example. When there was an unmooring of the ship would set sail, and people would stand on the shoreline and they would watch the ship as it would move out into the horizon, as it would set sail. People would stand at the harbor and they'd say, well, there she goes, there she's off. And I'm sure all of us have had a moment in time where we've seen a ship sail out. And there was also then on the other side, they would watch for the ship to sail back in to the next harbor it would arrive to. And they'd say, here it comes. And so not only, though, was this a nautical term, when soldiers would fold up their tent and move on to their next campaign, the very taking down of the tent and the folding up as the tent was packed up and moved on, they would use the same term as departure back in the early days, back in the first century. So not only was it a term for sailors, but also a term for the military, for the army. It was also used in a political form. When a prisoner was released from jail and they were to depart and they were set free, it was the same word that was used. And one more thing it was used for in the New Testament times in the first century was a farming term. When the farmer would unburden the ox at the end of the day, and he would take the yoke from the ox and he would lay aside the yoke, he would use the same word as he would depart, or use a departure from the ox as he laid down the yoke. So like the ship, David sailed into another port. Like the soldier, David has pulled up his tent pegs. Like the prisoner, David has been set free. And like the oxen, David has been able to lay down his burdens and has just gone home to be with God. Mark, I think I'm going to ask you to come up at this time, if you're ready, and share a few things with us, please.
That's tough to follow. Well, thank you for coming. We're here to honor Dad and his life. And I remember growing up on Tulsa Street. And it was an Ozzie and Harriet life. I told you I was going to be strong. What was interesting is everybody knew everybody. All the kids played with each other. And Dad was the Navy bear who controlled the Navy. We had a great time growing up. It wasn't perfect, but I remember it as a very happy time. One thing about Dad, was his sense of honor and service. From his time in the Navy to the service that he performed selflessly, really. He loved to go and visit shut-ins. was the type of work that to me was so scriptural. Nobody needed to tell him to do it. He loved doing it. It just seemed normal to him. So I remember most his sense of honor and duty. And I'll miss that. He loved the church, and he loved Mom, and he loved the boys. He loved his granddaughters, his grandson Aaron. Talked about Aaron a lot at the parties, even though Aaron was in California, because he always felt like we needed a balance in the pool parties. Though 6-1 would never have been a balance. But, you know, we had a good time when they moved out here to Tucson. Dad was steady to a fault right up until the end. And I was very lucky to be able to share the last 2 years of his life. It was funny. Even though most of his consciousness had passed, the last couple of years, I always knew what he was talking about. Bits and pieces of Hughes Aircraft, bits and pieces of the church, bits and pieces of the scriptures. Even talked about me being sure to get out and get that red Ferrari because he needed to drive that Ferrari one more time. I have no idea where that came from. He'd never owned any vehicle nice in his life, but that was kind of funny. We talked about that Ferrari a few times. My perception of Dad changed significantly in the later years. And the thing that I will take with me, and what I'd like to share with you guys, is the idea of sanctification. And most of us call it working our way to heaven as we get older. But the scriptural term is sanctification, and to me, Dad embodied that. He got much better as he got older. Just to share with you guys, he had a good passing, and I was able to be there with him. And I was lucky to literally be holding him while he passed. He had a good life. I'll love him and miss him. And even today, I told Catherine on her way out here, I just feel like there's a piece of my day missing. Because he doesn't need me anymore. But that's a good thing. So, thank you for coming. I wish I could have got through that better. Appreciate you all for coming.
So the saying goes, well done, good and faithful servant. Mark, I think, there's people who talk about the vision that they have before they pass. They sort of get this image of heaven and Christ meeting them at the door. And I think the Ferrari, some of us have the cattle on 1,000 hills and others the Ferraris, on 1,000 hills. So maybe that's what he was actually seeing in store, So the cars that he didn't have down here, he'll give you a ride around up there,
He didn't remember anybody's name, but he knew the Ferrari.
Man after my own heart, I think. I'd like to open the floor up to anybody that would also like to spend a moment sharing a memory, saying what they would like to contribute to the moment. You can just stand up where you are if you'd like to stand up and say something. You're welcome to come up front. You're welcome to push me out of the way and stand behind the podium. But anybody at all that would like to do so? Ellie?
My favorite know that both my grandparents, both my grandpas share my love, games and fun, and the memory that I have the most of my favorites. He used to get up with us at 5:30 in the morning. Rachel's always loved to sleep, and Farmer liked to sleep, but Farmer would get up with me, and we would play games and walk the dogs. And I'll forever remember his hats that he used to wear. And dumb luck for me, my husband likes those hats too. So I'll just always remember Farmer for his spirit and his love of life and how much he loved his grandchildren. And as much as he wanted the girls, he was so excited when we had a boy in the family. And I don't think I'll ever forget just how much he loved his family.
Do you remember the talking hat?
The Christmas hat, yeah,
Do you-
red reindeers.
Yes. Anyone else? It's a hard thing, speaking, I can understand the difficulty. Thanks, Al. Anyone at all?